Hey, it's Glenn, and I'm getting back on track. I'm trying to get back on track with the series I started for this channel last year called The Books I Love. I just got a little sidetracked by life, but I have every intention of continuing to do that little series. So, as a refresher, because it's been a minute since I put one of these up, this is not me reviewing books. This is not me telling you all about the story. This is about my connection with a book and why I love it. These aren't very long videos. They're just, I'm an author. This is an author channel. I want to talk about the books I love. So for this episode, I want to talk about why I love The Neverending Story by Michael Ende. I don't know how to say his name. I looked up German interviews so I could hear the guy. I don't know what he's saying until I hear the name, because I've heard it pronounced so many different ways by Americans. Most commonly, I think I've heard Michael Ende, and but I think it's actually pronounced from the guy interviewing him in Germany. He introduced him as Michael Ende, so whatever, Michael Ende, if you're an American, but. Right, so The Neverending Story, long before I read the book, I saw the movie as a child, and it was kind of dark and disturbing. I respected it for that. I always respected children's stories that weren't afraid to have an element of darkness and horror and death and brutality, because I personally think it's good for children to hear that kind of story, because the world is full of darkness and scary monsters and brutality. That's not all there is to the world. There's also, rainbows and pots of gold here and there, but if that's all if that's all that's in your kid's diet of stories, they're not going to be prepared when they walk out the door into that world for what's really out there, There are sharks in the ocean who will bite you in half. That's right, little Timmy. Monsters really are hiding under your bed, so I'd be a terrible father. But, no, really though, I do think that, a child's balanced diet of storytelling should include some challenging things, some challenging concepts, some brutal truth. But when I was a little kid, The Neverending Story was not my favorite film. It wasn't until I was in junior high school. I was in 8th or 9th grade, and I had a teacher who made us watch that movie and made us basically read between the lines, so to speak. Okay, the surface story is easy to see, but let's break it down. What is this story really about? And his take on it was that it was about the arts. And so I will, I don't really want to break down the whole story. I don't want to give spoilers, because I hope that you'll read this book and be surprised and fall in love with it yourself. But I will say a little bit about it, because otherwise nothing I'm saying will make any sense. So the big bad in the movie and in the first half of the book, we'll get to that, because this video is about the book, not the movie. So it's this thing called the Nothing. It's like a storm going through this fantasy world called Fantasia. In the movie, it's called Fantasia. But what it does is just erasing the world, basically. It's the nothing. When it's like a storm of nothing, and it's just rolling across Fantasia, And he spun it that it's about the arts. It's about funding for the arts in schools being taken away. It's about, just erasing the imagination, erasing fantasy and creativity, because that all exists within this fictional book that Bastian, the kid in the real world, is reading. He's reading the book called The Neverending Story, and this is all the stuff that's happening in it. And his father in the movie is all, your teacher says you're drawing horses again in school, and he's all, they were unicorns. But he's like, well, you need to get your feet on the ground, son. Like, so my teacher's take on this film was that it was about that it was about the arts being threatened in public schools. He's a teacher, he works in the public school system. But what he taught me was that it's not always just what it seems. A story is not just the surface story. And I started looking deeper into every story that I took in any form, books, films, television. What is this story really about? Is Star Wars about Jedi Knights in a galaxy far, far away, or is it about the Vietnam War? It's great being able to look deeper into a story. It enriches a story. And in fact, I started analyzing the Neverending Story in later years, and I have a completely different take on the meaning of it. And especially the part of the book that's depicted in the film being about overcoming depression. But, all that said, that was my introduction to the Neverending Story. So I found the book. I worked in a bookstore. And I saw the book on the shelf, The Neverending Story, in a hardback. And I opened it up, and this book, it's like no book I have ever read. Like, there's not black and white print in there. It's like some of it's in red, some of it's in green. And I was so enthused to actually read the novel that one of my now favorite films was adapted from. And so I bought a copy and tore into it. And it was like doing a mind-altering drug. It was like, just as a creative person, it really opened my mind to the possibilities. Like, the guy writing it, I can see a brain that works like mine creatively, but it's like he reins himself in. Because I don't know where to begin, so I'm kind of rambling right now. So I'll get to that part. Just the way his storyteller mind works. But just the creativity of the real world parts of the book, where there's this kid, Bastian, Balthazar Bucks, who is kind of a social outcast, and he escapes into this fantasy book called The Neverending Story. But the chapters that are about him in the real world are printed in red. And the chapters that are about the fantasy world he's reading about, which in the book is called Fantastica, are printed in green. So you always know, based on the color of the text, which world you're in. I thought that was brilliant, just so outside the box. And I always find outside the box things being done encouraging, because it's kind of like permissive. It's like you can break the mold as a writer. You can break the mold as a publisher. You can do crazy things. Just because it's not the way it's done doesn't mean it can't be done that way. The Neverending Story, no black text in the entire book. And now to where I can see how as a storyteller his brain works kind of like mine, because, and I just loved it because sometimes I feel like I'm out of control with like spin-offs and sequels and prequels to the things I write that take place in the same world. I'm like, oh, well, this is about this character who was in this book, but you don't need to have read that book, but, this is about him before this, or, just kind of, I'm all over the place. Like, I'll have a cast of characters in a book, and a side character will intrigue me to the point that I want to follow them in a different story altogether. And see where they're going, or where they came from, or what they're all about. Just as much as I want to follow the protagonist of the book I'm on, and I'll do it, but not in the same book. But other I have literary universes that I work in, where characters cross over and such, but crossover and spin-off, and I've had people tell me I hate spin-offs, and I'm just like, well, that's a strange blanket statement to make because it doesn't make sense. Like, because if a good spin-off is its own story. Like, if it's not like just there to make content and make money, if it's a genuine creative path to follow, I'm all for it. Some of my favorite stories have been spin-offs of other stories. But, so what I love in this book, a continuing, I don't want to call it a running gag. It's not a gag. It's like something that happens over and over and over again in this book is, so in the fantasy world of Fantastica, we'll be reading the green text, following that story. This child warrior, Atreyu, has been chosen to go on a quest to save Fantastica from the nothing. I mean, it's very much like the movie. I thought the movie was actually a fairly good adaptation. It did change some things, which I don't know why they changed, but I'm not going to go into that. That is another story, and shall be told another time. We'll talk about this book isn't about the differences between the movie and the book. That's why I love the book. But that's what I'm talking about, is he'd write these scenes in Fantastica where, Atreyu's in the moment. Atreyu is our main character. We're following his journey, his quest. But there's all these other characters he meets. And then the author will start going, at the end of the scene, or when a supporting character walks off of the page, so to speak, when Atreyu and they part ways, he'll start going on a tangent about the other character. And he'll start telling you, and then of course he would go on to do this and blah blah blah, but then he'll stop himself and always end it with, but that's another story and shall be told another time. Let's get back to Atreyu. Just kind of showing that the multi-layered meaning of the title, The Neverending Story, could go in all directions, and all characters have their own very interesting story. Everyone you meet in this world is a potential protagonist of their own epic story. Including the kid in the book who's reading the book within the book. Oh my gosh, I love it. And it's the whole concept of, so Bastian is reading a book about Atreyu, but we're reading a book about Bastian. And I want to say that's laid out in the book. I can't remember specifically if someone mentions to Bastian. Yeah, I know they do in the movie. But I think they do in the book as well, just pointing out to him, you were following Atreyu's story, but other people are following your story. Like, it's a never-ending story. Everything is layered. So we reading the book are like, wait, are other people following my story? Like, it's really cool. Like, just, I love the layers, the depth, the message of the book, and I do feel like the first half of it is about struggling through depression, but the first half of the book is the movie. The movie is not an adaptation of the entire book, just the first half. The Neverending Story 2, the next chapter, don't believe it, that's not based on the second half of the book. Tragically. There are elements from the second half of the book that make their way into that movie, but it's not a real adaptation, because the second half of the book, it's like, okay, so the quest is accomplished halfway through the book, but then it goes on, and on, and on, and the boy who was reading the book from the red text protagonist he's in the green text. He is fully immersed in this book to the point that he becomes, well, I don't want to spoil it. But it does go on. And just his immersion in this fantasy world becomes the story. And it also becomes a story about power and corruption, and it's just about so many things, and it executes every point it's trying to make so well. I love this book. And I found it empowering as a creative person, as a writer myself. Just all of the outside the box things that Ende did with this novel make it one of my all-time favorites. I could go on and on about it. I'd love to just go into talking about the movie and the differences between the book and the movie, the part of the book that was adapted into film. Why Ende hated the movie, just exactly how brilliantly the first half of the book and the movie illustrate struggling through crippling depression and overcoming it. But I won't, because that is another story and shall be told another time. This is the books I love, and I love the Neverending Story. So if you want to see more of these videos, follow my vlog and all the other things I do on my quirky little micro-author channel. Please do like and subscribe if you are so kind and so inclined. If you want to check out my writing, my novels and short fiction and all of that, the podcast I do with Matthew Paul called Autodidactica, you can go to my author website, glensladeclarkjr.com, and all of it's there. Everything you need to stalk a man, I have put on my author website. So, I'll be back with another book that I love next month. Until then, leave a comment if you've read The Neverending Story and loved it, or read The Neverending Story and hated it, or read The Neverending Story and were indifferent. I want to hear your thoughts on this book. So that's it for now, and I will talk to you next time.